We have been talking about building the beloved community all month, and we come to the last day in that series. And it is fitting that we close the series out with imagining the realm of God. And I thought about that because I thought about that realm of God, reign of God. You've heard it said in so many ways, kingdom of God. But the first image that comes to my mind is the Lord's Prayer, the prayer we were taught. And we've grown up praying the Lord's Prayer and reciting the familiar part. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we've said it so much, I wonder if we have ever contemplated what the world would look like if indeed the reign of God came in all its fullness. Here's the question: do we really want the kingdom of God to come? Do you? I will be honest with you. My life is kind of comfortable. I like watching Game of Thrones on Sunday nights. I suspect that God may have other things in mind for my Sunday nights. So, do we really want the kingdom of God to come? Are we prepared for the future in which God's sovereignty truly ushers in the kind of world in which Jesus beckons us? I do like a good spa day. And I do like the comforts of life. Oh, I'm not saying that when God's reign is fully ushered in, it'll be this sad kind of thing. No, no, no. What I'm saying is it's going to be different. It's going to be different. And I'm not talking about the fantasies of heaven that we have grown up with, of streets of gold, of golden harps and angel wings. No. I'm talking about the kingdom of God, or the reign of God, the reign of heaven that Jesus talked about. And my sense is that many of us have not given it much thought at all. I haven't given it much thought, and I'm supposed to think about this stuff. And if we have, I suspect we think it's so unrealistic as to be unimaginable to think about what it could be. Many of the people Jesus encountered had a hard time understanding what Jesus meant when he preached about the reign of heaven, when he talked about what it would look like when God's sovereign rule was total and ultimate. And so Jesus used parables, stories, as an attempt to give his listeners a sense of the different nature, the uniquely countercultural, the alternative ordering of the world under God's reign. In his earlier Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught and preached to his disciples and followers the practical and ethical obligations they had in the reign of God. The discourse on the Beatitudes, turning the other cheek and loving your enemies, avoiding hypocrisy in prayer and worship, following the golden rule, loving God with all your heart and your might, and loving your neighbor as yourself. He spells out for them what is expected of them if they wanted to be a part of God's reign. And I can imagine their response. But Jesus, if I did everything you commanded, if I loved my neighbor, if I loved my enemy, if I prayed for my enemy, if I turned the other cheek, if I gave my neighbor my cloak, what does it mean to be in the reign? We still live in the world we live in. The world is still a pretty terrible place. We still live in an empire that oppresses us. We still live in an economic system where there's so much scarcity. So if I did everything you told me to do, what is this this reign of God you're talking about? Is it any difference in the way I live and the quality of my life? So Jesus continued to use those symbols of that economy, symbols of that empire, to try to explain to them what the reign of heaven looks like. Now, I know we've heard parables all our lives. We've grown up with them. And especially when we were kids, they would tell us the parables. And unfortunately, in doing that, we've kind of domesticated the parables. We made them conform to the way life is. You notice I just told you about what I like to do in my time, with my time. And believe it or not, that's what most of us do with the parables. We've kind of softened the edges so that we don't have to change too much of our lives. We've sort of let the parables be these nice little stories to make us believe that we really get it. And then we often emphasize the allegories and the analogies of the parables to harmonize them with what's familiar and comfortable to us. But I don't want us to do that. I want us to be shocked by what Jesus told them in those parables. I want us to grasp the overall picture Jesus is trying to paint of the reign of heaven for his listeners. I want us to try to put ourselves in the place of those listeners as they hear Jesus shock their sensibilities with his descriptions that just don't quite fit what they know of how the world works. And when we hear the parables in this way, I want us to get the idea from Jesus that the reign of heaven is everything that the world in which his listeners live is not. That everything Jesus describes is the values, the worldviews, and the commitments are completely different from the values and worldviews and commitments of the empire. That everything Jesus is setting up is in direct contradiction with what is going on around them. So, when Jesus says God's reign is like a mustard seed, he is asking them to see within something so small the potential for something to grow so big that it can be the source of life, of sustenance, of safety, even for birds. It didn't shock you. Okay, that's all right. Yes, something that is so small is actually so significant that it has within it life itself. And it can grow so big that it can become the source of life for anybody or anything, even birds. Or let's go further. Jesus says God's reign is like yeast hidden in 3 measures of flour. Now, that probably doesn't make any sense. 3 measures of flour actually is 60 pounds of flour. 60 pounds. So what Jesus is saying is, if you add yeast to 60 pounds, you can imagine how much bread that is. That is beyond your imagination. So the reign of heaven is like putting hiding yeast in 60 pounds of flour, such that when you bake all of that bread, it is so much that is not so much that anybody can come and eat it. Anybody, there is more than enough. Anybody who dares to have a morsel of food, they can have it, because there is so much bread you can't even imagine. Trust me, in ancient Palestine in the 1st century, no one could imagine 60 pounds of flour. And how much bread it can create. That is shocking to them. That the reign of heaven is like that. The reign of heaven is like that. More than enough. So much extravagance. So much abundance. That there is more than enough for everybody to get some and to be satisfied. That's what the reign of heaven is like. Oh, I don't think I shocked you enough. Let's keep going. When Jesus tells them that the reign of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, he's asking them to imagine a person discovering something so precious and so valuable beyond estimation that it would inspire them to sell everything they had, all of their possessions, just to possess it, just to get it. Doesn't matter. It's so valuable, I will give up anything and everything I have. In fact, more than that, God's reign is like a merchant looking for a fine pearl. And when he finds it, his whole life, his whole mission, a merchant is supposed to buy, sell, find all kinds of artifacts and commodities to sell and buy. But this merchant finds a pearl and sells everything he has because he's found it once and for all. So here's the thing. Everything, when he finds, his whole life changes. His whole reason for being completely changes. When he finds what he's looking for, he is no longer someone who has the fine pearl, the finest pearl that he could find. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't it sound like Jesus' first disciples? They dropped everything to be a part of what God was doing in the world. And they were no longer fishers. They were no longer tax collectors. They were no longer anything they were. They were now disciples of Jesus. Their whole life changed because they found a fine pearl. That's what the reign of God, that you will change your entire identity from what you were to something else because you found it. Because you found it. Oh, I want to shock you with it. You've seen it. You've seen it. People whose whole lives become something completely and utterly different because they found the reign of heaven. Oh, see, when Jesus says the reign of heaven is like a net thrown into the sea, he wants his listeners to understand that God's realm is indiscriminately inclusive of all people. Like a dragnet, you throw it out. It doesn't matter what gets caught up in here. Everything from the best fish to a stinky crab to a lobster to even some of those bottom feeders that you don't want to eat. Everything gets in. Everything. And then the reign is like this, that we don't even do the sorting. We just grab it all. Just anybody comes, and the sorting will be done later. Not by us, but by the angels. You get it? Oh, every one of those churches now that is trying to sort even before they gather, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not in the reign of God. You're in the reign of whatever your church is. No, the reign of God grabs everybody. Oh, that would have been surprising. That would have been surprising. I don't want to be in the net with them. I don't want to be in the net. No, the reign of heaven grabs everybody in its path. And then God will do the sorting later. God will do the sorting later. Right now, it is all about gathering. It is all about God. So this reign Jesus is talking about, these stories that Jesus told about the reign of heaven, it is characterized in something that is completely different than what the world is offering. This reign Jesus is talking about is characterized by life and possibilities. It is characterized by extravagant abundance, priceless value, inspiration to go all in like the merchant did. And it's about indiscriminate inclusivity. And so here's the thing. Even when we're not sure that we want God's kingdom to come, the one thing we ought to know is that when indeed the reign does come, and when we indeed live out the reign in our own discipleship right now, then God's reign is active. It is generative. It is destabilizing. People are supposed to look at us and say, these people are out of their minds. They love too much. They embrace too many people. They go all in for God. That is supposed to shock the sensibilities. And so these parables reveal that God's realm will not follow the prevailing norms of the society. God's empire upends the status quo and confounds the expected responses. And so it will do us no good to try to domesticate what the reign of God is. It will do us no good to try to make God's will conform to the rules and practices and philosophies of the world around us. No, the reign of heaven makes possible what the world has convinced us is impossible, implausible, improbable. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Lives have been transformed. You could never have imagined it. You know somebody sitting here in this sanctuary right now whose life has been transformed beyond anything you even expected or thought could possibly happen to them. You've seen it. You've seen it. You've seen people find the kind of love they thought was never possible. That when they were rejected by their churches, they came and found a beloved community where they could be themselves. You've seen it. You've seen it. And you're looking at it right now, standing before you. I never thought that I would be standing before you as a minister of the gospel. I did not see it possible. Oh, I was one of those fancy lobbyists. Oh, I had it going on. I had power. I had access to money. I could pick up the phone and call any politician in Washington, D.C. I ever wanted to speak to with just a phone call. But then God said something different. I encountered the reign of heaven and my whole identity changed and I went all in. That's the reign of heaven. I can't explain it. And if I was doing the planning, I wouldn't have planned it that way. No offense. If I was doing the planning, I wouldn't have planned it that way. But when you encounter that fine pearl, you'll sell everything you own just to do it. Just to go all in with God. That's what the reign of God is all about. That's what the reign of heaven makes possible. And here's the thing. Here's the thing. We exist in it right now. Oh, it's something that we aspire to. But right now, we can live out what it means to be in the reign of heaven right now. The reason Jesus told them to love their enemies, the reason Jesus told them to turn the other cheek, the reason Jesus told them to do unto others as you would have them do, is because Jesus also knew that they themselves can live out the true meaning of the reign of heaven right then and right now. And that's what we are called to do. That's how we are called to live right now. That if we're going to build the beloved community, we